Welcome back to another exciting episode. My name is Josh Kelly, and this is the often imitated, rarely duplicated ISVs on tap. Joining me today is Ognjen Todic from Keen Research. Ognjen, thanks for jumping on this podcast with me. It's great to have you. As we get started here, would you mind just giving us an introduction to you and tell us how you came into the situation with Keen Research?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me on this show. So I've been in technology space for almost 30 years now, as witnessed by my gray hair. In the early days, I worked at a startup in Silicon Valley that pioneered the use of speech recognition for spoken language assessment. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we're using speech recognition neural networks back then. Some pretty cool stuff. And then I spent a number of years helping other companies develop their in-house software solutions. And I also tried and failed to build a music search startup. And in the last 8 years, I've been running Keen Research as a product company where we're focused on developing and licensing software development kits for on-device speech recognition on mobile devices and custom hardware. I bootstrapped this company, and for the first few years, it was a one-man show. And I was doing technical development, selling, doing everything else in between. And it definitely wasn't easy, but, it's never easy when you kind of build new things. But since then we grew. We're a small team now, and we continue to organically grow. We'll talk more about this, but we have traction in a couple of different verticals. Educational technology is a pretty big one, but also enterprise software. And I think this is why we're kind of have been in touch and working with you guys. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the speech software piece. So obviously that's kind of, if my understanding is correct, that's kind of the bread and butter of Keen Research. I mean, that's what drives
the
business, right? So let's dive into that a little bit, because I do know that you're working with some of our resellers out there already. So tell me a little bit about how this works, because I think if I'm understanding properly here, it's on-device speech software
recognition. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So our product is software development kit. So it's a piece of software that other companies would license and integrate into their own software. So the integration is at the software level. You use APIs that we provide to basically add speech recognition functionality to your product. And at the high level, the product SDK is pretty high level. So it's kind of, the goal is to abstract the complexity, around speech recognition if you want to add voice control, for example, to your mobile app or your hardware. So there's kind of few things that make our solution unique. Obviously, we emphasize on-device piece a lot. And, what that means is that everything happens locally on the device. So you don't need to stream the speech data to the cloud. It's all done locally. So, and why that kind of enables a bunch of different use cases that it would be problematic if you were to run this in the cloud. So obviously, if there's no internet connectivity, that's a big one, right? Our solution can still run if you're somewhere in a mine or wherever there's no internet connectivity or there's no reliable internet connectivity. Privacy and security are big ones also. So again, if you're not relying on a third party to send speech data, maybe during the duration of the whole shift, of your worker. So again, everything stays locally on the device. The other piece, and we'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper into this, is because it's happening locally, you can do always on listening. So a number of our customers use the SDK in a scenario where it's the user is using it throughout their whole shift. And unless they take a break or something like that, the SDK is listening for their commands. And if you were to do that with the cloud, that would be kind of very, very complicated and probably cost prohibitive as well. So the other piece is also cost, again, because it runs locally, you don't need to provision anything on the cloud. What else? Reliability. Again, you don't depend on internet connectivity. You don't depend on the back end for speech recognition. And last thing that's relevant in these types of use cases that we'll kind of talk more is customization also. So, if there's a lot of technical jargon, domain-specific terminology, we can easily handle things like that.
So my understanding too, Ognjen, is because it's a localized speech recognition, you can do multiple languages, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So multiple languages. The other part is you can overlay this on tell me what devices you can do an overlay on this with, and what kind of hardware this is compatible with.
Yeah, so our main focus has been on kind of mobile devices. And, when we started, we were running on, I don't know, iPhone 6 or 7, just to give you an idea. And, we can still do that. So we can go pretty far back when it comes to mobile devices. Maybe like 1.5 gigahertz CPU is kind of the threshold. But, a lot of this is also we know how to make it run on smaller devices if necessary. These things just keep kind of getting faster and better. And it's actually pretty crazy what these, especially recent devices can do, things that we keep in our pockets. So definitely mobile devices, it's a no-brainer. We do have actually a web SDK also that runs in the browser. So this could be potentially any device. But again, there's some kind of constraints there. It cannot be just anything like Raspberry Pi Zero. It wouldn't run, but it could run on Raspberry Pis that are a little bit more advanced, AR, VR headsets, if anything is game there. All of these are pretty capable. And if it's a custom hardware, again, it goes back to, it's kind of like 1.5 gigahertz CPU. A lot of these CPUs have multiple cores. We just take fraction of one core, so it's pretty lightweight, I would say.
Yeah. So with BlueStar, our bread and butter here at BlueStar is obviously kind of the warehousing, manufacturing space, and it's also in retail, hospitality, point of sale. Those are our two primary focuses, right? Or two of our primary focuses. And what I'm hearing you say, obviously it runs on iOS. There's a couple other that you mentioned there, but I'm assuming that this will also run on Android and possibly Windows.
Yeah, iOS and Android, definitely. Yeah, we do not support Windows, and generally, I think all these like tablets and definitely mobile devices, the Windows is kind of out of the picture now. AR as well. So Android definitely, and when it comes to these use cases, Android is the primary kind of OS, I would say. For the frontline, for enterprise/frontline worker type use cases.
You just made a lot of people happy here at BlueStar by you saying that. So thank you. All right. So we have our largest vendor line is Zebra. We also have Honeywell devices, and we also have ELO devices, right? So from a point of sale standpoint, as far as kind of where our largest vendor lines kind of sit. So it's good to know that you could potentially, if it's an Android device, you could take that and put it onto a Zebra handheld mobile computer and say, hey, I need to pick this item. Where is it? And you can kind of go through those on the back end. You can kind of go through the steps necessary to pick that item. Correct? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, so I think that definitely, first of all, Android, as I said, like the no-brainer. When it comes to use cases, and everything you mentioned that you're focused on at BlueStar, it's kind of pretty aligned with our kind of view of use cases and market. So obviously, frontline workers is a big one for us. When you think about frontline workers. And just to explain what I mean by that, people they're doing some works usually with their hands. So hands are busy. They may be in gloves or maybe greasy or, so, and these people often need to interact with systems. There are some systems now that tell them what to do, track what they're doing, to update the back end. So it's really difficult. And then safety is also another concern, right? If you need to look at the screen constantly and you're driving a forklift, that's a problem, right? So, voice is very natural for these types of use cases. And this is where also always on listening comes in. So typically, voice picking is a good example in warehouse management solutions, but any kind of digital workflow, checklist, procedure, think about inspection is game. Domain specific virtual assistants, usually narrow, but, like kitchen backend solutions, or like one of our customers is a company and solution for, it's a virtual assistant for sports pilots. So you're flying your own Cessna, you're supposed to take off, and there's a procedure you need to do before you take off. There's a procedure you need to do when you land. And, instead of walking around with a piece of paper, you put a headset in, you walk around, you define the procedure ahead of time, and you're just being told what to check, and you're confirming things are okay or not okay. And then once you're on the plane, you can actually ask it specific questions, whether at the destination, anything that's relevant to that kind of domain. Kiosks and ordering and wayfinding, smart displays, VR training is an interesting vertical also for us. And then maybe, AR solutions I mentioned in general, but that's kind of orthogonal. A lot of these things can run on the AR headsets. One maybe tidbit, one interesting thought is we like to think about what we can enable as augmented reality for speech, right? So, think about AR headsets, they augment with vision, right? So you see some extra things, you get more information, you can do some things with gestures maybe to input information. And, with our solution, you can use a Zebra Android device and you can have augmented audio / speech reality, right? Where you can interact with the system while you're doing work, right? And you're just asking a question about whatever is relevant at that point. So that's the kind of an interesting way to think about these kind of domain-specific virtual assistants, very narrow, but they're augmenting an experience that for the worker.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you're touching on this sports pilot thing. Given all the recent air issues, maybe we got a case study here, Augie. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just a little guy. I'm just throwing that out there. So.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting to me. One differentiator I'd like you to touch upon, and I don't mean to put you too much on the spot here, is can you speak on the difference between your solution and AI? Because in my mind, they're very different. These are very different things. So and maybe I'm wrong, but can you kind of walk through that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I think AI is a very loaded term, I would say. It means different things to different people. If we're talking about these latest large language models, my take on that is that, there's a lot of hype, but there's also lots of great progress. But for these types of use cases that we're discussing, most of these solutions are still far from running on the device. There's some, it's not, it's going to happen, right? But, and often, we do get sometimes these kinds of questions where people are like, well, I want to use the latest and greatest technology, right? And my take on this is, my recommendation is you should be using whatever is solving the problem, right? And if there's a simple technology that solves the problem, then you should not use something that's more complicated. And this is not to say that our solution is simple. We use deep neural networks. There's lots of kind of recent breakthroughs that we use. But you don't, if you're doing voice picking, you don't need to answer the questions about I don't know, somebody's concert or weather in Chicago, or, it's very, very constrained, right? So you're kind of using, a big hammer where you need to really push like a little pin into the wall. That's not the right solution for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. I'm a big fan of the keep it simple, stupid model. So I listen. You're preaching to the choir here, Augie. You really are.
Yeah.
I think to your point, I think sometimes we overcomplicate some of these things. And let's be honest. I mean, I've been in this industry long enough to know that if I walk into a distribution center or a warehouse, there's still people there that are using pencil and paper to pick orders, right?
Oh, yeah.
So how do you, and this is a rhetorical question, I don't expect you to answer this, but how would you take somebody from that perspective and say, I need the latest and greatest technology? Because to your point, I don't think you don't need to do that necessarily. Let's just digitize that process first. And then let's start talking about the next step or the next jumps, right? It's simple
Yeah.
things. And for you, it sounds like, or for Keen Research solution, what would be best is if we have that paper picking model in a warehouse, we want to get them on a handheld device and we want them to pick. Now, the beauty about using the voice recognition here is your hands free, to your point. So regardless, if I'm hearing you. If you have greasy hands, if you have dirty hands, you have gloves on, it's cold, it's whatever it is that prevents you from using your hands. But still, if you have both hands as a picker, now I got the device tucked in some sort of a sleeve or a case on my hip, and I'm grabbing products, sticking in the bag, or I can grab two products at the same time and kind of work through it that way. So I wholeheartedly, I think this is a good idea. And by the way, I did research your website. One of the people I'm going to meet with here in a couple of weeks at ProMat, I'm hoping to connect with is on your website. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm not going to I'm not going to say anybody's name here because I don't want to, because then I'll hear all about it from other people. So
Okay, all right, sounds great. We'll be there too. So
well, perfect.
at ProMat, yeah.
Do you have a booth? Do you have a booth?
We don't have a booth this year. We were there 2 years ago, had a booth. This year we decided just to visit because, again, a lot of, for us, it's really working. Our customers will be people who have booths,
Okay. Yes. Okay.
So that kind of like, we're debating and decided to just don't do the booth this year.
Yeah, right on. One last question, and then we'll get to the point. The whole reason I'm doing this is, tell me who would be an ideal customer for you from our reselling standpoint through BlueStar.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we don't build end user solutions. We're technology enabler, so we can help other companies who have control over their software voice enable their product. So what we're looking for is, customers who need these sorts of capabilities. And again, our goal is to take the complexity out of the picture. If you're interested in voice enabling your product, not just the goal, that's actually what we're doing. So as a customer, you would get a high-level solution that abstracts a lot of complex components when it comes to speech recognition, and it would allow you to quickly provide voice interface in your products.
Excellent. Augie, I just thought of another use case while you were talking, and I was thinking how great this would be for someone who's disabled,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in a restaurant, you have limited mobility. Maybe you're in a wheelchair, maybe you have crutches, maybe there's some other device preventing you from mobility, and you can go up to a kiosk now and say, I would like a double cheeseburger and fries and a milkshake, and that happens.
Yeah, accessibility is a pretty big area where solutions like this can really make a big difference. We do actually work with Medtronic and their partner, the University of Louisville, and they're building using our SDK to basically voice enable one of their products that provides some sort of electric stimulation to the spine, and users can fully control it. But often users don't have maybe dexterity. They cannot actually touch the screen and use it, so they can do it with their voice. And the feedback we've we've been getting from that is, again, it's like game changing, because it helps control the pain, lots of other things, and it's really a great use case.
That's fantastic. You know what? At the end of the day, we're all working for a reason, right? But that's got to make you feel pretty good to know that your solution is helping people that really need it, right? That's a true need, right? This other stuff is excellent. It's amazing, but for somebody that can really benefit from it from a quality of life standpoint, it's a game changer. That's got to make you feel
definitely
good.
Definitely.
All right, Ogi, thank you so much. The name of the show is ISVs on Tap. There, I'm going to hunch down and look even more pitiful and whatever. But ISVs on Tap. So Ogi suggested a beer. I was not able to find it because he's in California. But we had to find something that was more national. So Ogi, you want to tell us what you chose?
Yeah, I chose Stella.
Stella Artois. That's a good beer. That's a, you know what? That's a solid choice. Solid choice. It's one of those, in my opinion, it's one of those beers. It's kind of reminds me, it's got like a European lager feel to it, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's Belgian, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I looked it up before I like Pilsners in general. And then I have these kind of one-offs like the Pliny that I suggested. It's very small brewery, not too far from, I'm in Northern California. But yeah, Stella is kind of an easy, plan B always.
It is. So tell me, so Ogi, what's that? What's the origin there? Are you comfortable saying? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Oh, of course. So I'm from Serbia originally, former Yugoslavia, I think I mentioned this in the beginning. My full name is Ognjen. A lot of consonants. As my wife's a teacher, and one of her friends used to call me, "Oh, can I buy a vowel?" so Ogi was my nickname when I was a kid, and that's just much easier.
Well, you know what, man? That's something you shouldn't have told this guy, because if I see you at ProMat in a couple of weeks, I'm like, "Oh, can I buy a vowel?" You're going to hear me yelling at across the trade room floor, just so you're aware. And it's probably
all right.
I want to get Nicola to share your information with me. I want to see if I can find out where you're at on the floor, and then I'm going to stand like 30 feet away and yell that. So just if you're looking for another beer that reminds me of Stella, I like Stella a lot. I think it's good. But another one that I like that's similar to this, and I found it when we were in London. I'd never had one. And it's crazy. I got to fly all the way over there to find this thing. But it's a world beer, but it's Carlsberg.
Yeah.
That's another solid one. And I always get jumpy, if that's the right term, about beers in green bottles. Because if you keep them in the light, they'll get skunky on you. So, all right, Ogi, that does it. I appreciate you being on here. I really hope I bump into you here in a few weeks for a number of reasons, including business, but so I can yell, "Oh, can I buy a vowel?" So thanks again for being on here. Thanks for being part of ISVs on Tap. Until next time, cheers.